Welcome to another episode of Chief Influencer. I'm your host, Anthony Schopp, co-founder of Social Driver. Let's face it, Washington is the center of influence in the US and arguably in the world. Chief Influencer features leaders who have figured out how to break through in today's fragmented and fast-changing environment. Social Driver teamed up with the Communications Board and the George Washington University College of Professional Studies to recognize these incredible leaders as chief influencers and highlight how they inspire and influence others. Well, very excited to be here. I really want to thank Dean Riddle and the whole team at the GW College of Professional Studies and the Graduate School of Political Management for an incredible partnership. Getting to bring leaders like Terry and share their stories is a really important thing that we do together. So thank you, Liesl. How many of you are attending your first Chief Influencer event? Whoa, a lot. That's great. We love that. That is exciting. Well, as you all know, Washington's the center of influence, not just in our country, but in the world. Social Driver teamed up with the College of Professional Studies and the Communications Board to launch this ambitious project. We decided to ask some of the most influential and inspiring people around for their secrets to success. And on the Chief Influencer podcast, which is available anywhere you like to listen to podcasts and on YouTube as well, here's some of the things that we found. The Swiss ambassador, Jacques Pitlou, told us how he influences through diplomacy and then used those skills to go viral on social media. The filmmaker Peggy Reisky told us how she used the power of storytelling to win an Oscar and then to launch the Trevor Project. Congressman Andy Kim, a GW grad, gave us hope that politics can be civil and public servants can act with humility and integrity. And just last week, Ben's Chili Bowl co-founder, Virginia Ali, told us how a 66-year-old small business has made a monumental impact in our nation's capital and around the world. Well, today is very special because we are featuring someone who's not only influential in his own right, but he's helped the most powerful person in the world, the President of the United States, maximize his influence. Terry Szuplat is a former White House speechwriter and author of the new book, Say It Well, Find Your Voice, Speak Your Mind, Inspire Any Audience. Many of you have already gotten a copy, which is fantastic. Here are 3 things I think you should know about Terry before we dive in. Number 1, Terry served as special assistant to President Barack Obama and as a senior member of his National Security Council staff for all 8 years of Obama's presidency, including as deputy director of the White House speechwriting office. Number 2, during his time at the White House, Terry helped craft speeches on a wide range of national security and foreign policy issues. He traveled with Obama to more than 40 countries, contributing to some of the president's most memorable and consequential addresses to audience all over the world. And number 3, today, Terry runs his own speechwriting and strategic communications firm, Global Voices Communications, and he teaches speechwriting at his alma mater, American University School of Public Affairs. We're very excited to have you here at GW. Maybe you'll start teaching here too.
This is a big moment for me.
Yes. And his essays have been in major publications, including The New Yorker, New York Magazine, Washington Post, etc. Terry, your book, Say It Well, has already been praised as an invaluable guide for anyone who wants to speak with confidence and impact. You've been called a master storyteller, a skilled communicator, and a trusted advisor to the President of the United States. So today we are thrilled to call you a chief influencer.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me. Thanks for being here.
It is, yes. I wondered if you could take us back to your childhood. Did you ever imagine that you'd be in the Oval Office?
I should lay on the couch.
Yeah, right? Could you ever think you'd be in the Oval Office working alongside the President of the United States?
I mean, no. Does anybody? I mean, maybe there are some people, but I grew up in Massachusetts on Cape Cod, a few towns over from Hyannisport. So even as a kid, I grew up with the sort of Kennedy mystique all around us. I mean, the Kennedys were locals. They were in the news all the time. And I was sort of surrounded by that. And my mother knew I was fascinated by politics, and she gave me a record. And for the young students here, a record is a round thing that you put a needle on it and it plays music for you. But in my case, it was an album of John F. Kennedy speeches. And so other kids would be outside playing and I'd be inside listening to speeches by John F. Kennedy. And I didn't know words like cadence, rhythm, and poetry. But I just, even as a kid, I knew there was something in those speeches that was different, that appealed to the best in us. And that, I know politics, we all know this, politics can be ugly and messy. And so often in DC we see the worst of it. But in those speeches, I felt like I was seeing the best of what could happen in politics in our country. So I had this spark of something. I didn't know where it was going to lead. I kind of wanted to be a reporter for a long time, to write, but never in my wildest dreams did I think I'd get to be in the Oval Office with a president.
I've seen some photos of that. I mean, it must be an amazing experience.
Unnerving, terrifying.
In your book, I mean, I loved the book, Say It Well. And by the way, you traveled with Obama to over 40 countries. Now your book is available in over 50 countries.
That's right. As of today, it's being published in the UK, and it's available in more than 50 countries around the world. So
that's incredible. We know there's
exciting.
There's a lot of places you could be, so we're really happy to have you here with us.
This is great.
So in Say It Well, you write about the importance of speaking human. And I wondered if you could elaborate on this concept and how, it makes leaders more effective communicators. And also, I'm really interested in your thoughts on maintaining authenticity while you have to craft things that are carefully prepared and each word is chosen so deliberately.
Sure. So there's a chapter in the book called Talk Like a Human. It's such a low bar, right? But so many of us miss it, and so many leaders miss it, government and politics especially. I think the more time we spend in organizations and institutions and companies, we embrace this sort of vocabulary of the institution. Because we think it makes us sound smarter, it makes us sound more informed. And so we use all these buzzwords and this jargon, and we use it with each other. And it's bad enough when we use it within the organization, but then we get up and try to communicate what the organization or the company does to other people, and we get frustrated that they don't understand us. When we explained very clearly that we leverage innovation to synergize, to create catalytic outcomes, for positive developments, and we use all of these crazy words that don't mean anything. This is word salad. We hear it in politics and government all the time. Talk and talk and talk, and don't actually say anything concrete. And so, I have a whole chapter in the book about how we can. I'm on sort of a crusade against jargon here, and I think one of the rules that I offer is I call it the barbecue rules. Imagine if when you're with your family at a barbecue and they ask you what you do for a living. You don't engage in all this jargon. You just speak to them like a human being, so that even your nieces and your nephews who might be in the 8th grade can understand you. And I say 8th grade because, for better or worse, the average reading level in this country is around the 8th grade level. And a lot of State of the Union's addresses are written at around the 8th grade level. And that's because we're trying, we weren't sitting there going, well, no, this sentence is more 11th grade. We should make it 8th grade. But we were trying to make things as accessible as possible. I mean, you can't bring people in and inspire them and connect with them. They can't understand what you're saying. I had someone tell me once, well, if 90% of my audience understands it, I'm okay with that. I said, no, you should not be okay with that, because that means 10% of your audience doesn't understand what you're saying. And maybe in that 10% is your next partner, your next investor, your next donor, your next volunteer. And you're leaving them in the dark, and they're not going to join you. They're not going to partner with you. So you want to be clear for everybody.
That's one of the things I think about President Obama that resonated with so many people is his style of communication connected with such a wide audience. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about, obviously, we're going to discuss how each of us can influence through our own communication and writing. But in your experience as a White House speechwriter, you had to navigate the challenge of influencing President Obama while also helping him influence the masses through his speeches. I wonder if you could talk about that dynamic.
Yeah, I guess I'd come at it a little differently. I would never say I influenced Barack Obama. I didn't start working for him until a few months after he took office. So I was there. By then, by 2009, he had, since 2004, the big speech where he kind of exploded onto the national stage. That's 4 or 5 years of speeches and books and articles. He had his voice. He had his vision. And I think that's actually I talk about this in the book. I think we can all tell when a leader hasn't thought deeply about who they are and what they believe. Because they're saying one thing one week and another thing the next week, and you just, you can agree with Obama's politics or disagree with his politics. So I think one of the things he was such a good example of, and one of the reasons I wrote the book, is because he had thought deeply about, I think because of his own unique identity, his racial identity, he was forced to kind of think about himself more deeply than most of us do throughout his life. Like, who am I? What am I? What community am I part of? Am I part of more than one community? Where do I fit in? Like, what's my story? He had thought deeply, deeply. And years after the 2004 convention speech, David Axelrod, his advisor, said Barack Obama could not have given that speech if he hadn't thought deeply about his identity over many years and how his story fit into the story of America. And so one of the things I encourage in the book is that all of us can think about these big existential questions. Before we get up and stand up in front of an audience and expect them to believe in us and be inspired by us, we have to believe in ourselves. We have to know what we're about. And that raises some big questions. And I think this is one of the reasons why so many people fear public speaking, is because, well, what if I get judged? Well, when you're confident in who you are, you know what you believe, you know what you stand for, maybe what other people think about you doesn't matter so much. And I would say, take Barack Obama's 2004 speech, the big one, the first one, put it against his farewell address, and you will see thematic consistency. And that's the sign of a leader who knows who he is, knows what they believe, knows what they stand for. And so those fundamentals shouldn't change over time. And that's something we can all do.
Yeah. It's very humble to say that you didn't influence him at all. Obviously, you're right. We'll talk about that more. But I want to ask you, we have a lot of folks in this room. They might be students aspiring to work in the field of communications or influence, but some people who are in that role now, they're writing speeches for their bosses. They're writing statements from their organizations. And I wonder what advice you can give to a communications leader, a communications advisor, about how to effectively influence those that they work for. Because as you said before, if you're not speaking to the entire audience, if it's only 90% or in some cases less, that's not going to cut it. And sometimes it's the communications leader who has to give that news to the boss, and they have to sort of push them in a different direction. And I wonder if you could speak to that.
Yeah, first of all, I feel your pain. I've lived this for 30 years, and sometimes we're blessed to work for people who are good at this and who get it and who get what they're doing. And sometimes we're not. And that's not to say that they're not great people, but that I've had clients who are, phenomenal investor. They've worked with governments, all of them, one of the world's top investors, but, getting up in front of an audience and speaking to another group, that's a whole different set of skills. And so you see that in, business as well, right? They're at the top of their profession. They run the company because, they're maybe a great engineer or they're a great marketer. That doesn't necessarily translate to being a great communicator. And so I think as professionals, we're constantly trying to guide them to a better place. One thought that as I listen to you, and I've sort of come around on this over the years, I used to come at this with, well, I'm the professional. I'm the master communicator, right? I know what I'm doing, and so I need to push and push. And it's true. There are definitely bad habits and bad tics that certain leaders have. But I think actually one thing that we can all do is have some more humility, because I think that until you get up and give a speech yourself or present yourself, or you don't know what it's like. And ultimately, in the end, those words have to be true and authentic to the person coming from it. And if they just don't want to say it the way you've written it, you can encourage, you can cajole, you can point out the pros and cons. But in the end, it's their words, literally. And, that's the same thing with President Obama. People always say, well, what was it like to put the words of your words in the president's mouth? And that's not how we ever saw it at all. And we can talk about our process. But, President Obama never had to read a single word that was on the page. Every word was a choice. All it was a draft prepared by us in collaboration with him. And a leader gets to decide what words come out of their mouth. And if they don't like the draft that the team is prepared, they don't have to give it. And so in the end, it's their words, their voice. And so I think as professionals, one thing we can do is be even more humble, and that, all we can do is tee up as best we can what we think that's something that's consistent with their, the 3 V's, their voice, their vision, their values. And then ultimately it's their choice.
We notice with some leaders, when they switch from the prepared remarks to their off-the-cuff remarks, it's like 2 different speeches. Right. I won't name any names, but that's not really the case when you see President Obama speaking. So I think it says a lot about the content that you craft, that there's not that contrast.
One of the best compliments we would sometimes get is, our colleagues at the White House would know we've been working for days and weeks on a speech, and he'd get up and give it, and we'd be sitting there, and they'd put their hand on your shoulder and say, oh, I'm so sorry, he didn't use, there's so much of your speech he didn't use. And you're thinking, he used the whole thing. They couldn't tell. If the president went in and out, did some ad libs, did some asides. I mean, to us, that was the ultimate compliment, because this person who listened to him all the time couldn't tell the difference between the ad-libbing and the prepared remarks. And because that's ultimately what we're trying to do, is provide a script that, it's the speech that they would give and write for themselves if they only had time to do it.
Absolutely. I love that. A big part of speeches is personal stories. I mean, and that's so effective in authentic communication. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that, how you have helped leaders. Again, you work with lots of different leaders, obviously the most notable being President Obama, effectively incorporate their own experiences into the speeches or the communications they have. But also, you really have to like dig and find those stories sometimes because they're not your stories and you don't have that knowledge. So I wonder if you could talk about that and give some advice around that.
So this is one of the biggest lessons of the book. I have a whole chapter called Say What Only You Can Say. And I think for anyone who's ever struggling with public speaking or wants to be a better public speaker, or hasn't done it before, this is the best way to connect with your audience and to deliver authentic speeches. Your audience wants you. They don't want generic. They don't want you to get up and read a policy paper. They want to connect with you. And so, think of all the speeches that have impacted you the most, that have resonated with you the most. It's when a speaker gets up and speaks from their heart about who they are. And so, yeah, I lay out in the chapter all the sort of questions you might ask yourself to really personalize your remarks. And as a speechwriter, I would do this with my clients. And I was doing this once with a former cabinet secretary. And we were around the dining room table, and I was asking all of these questions. Tell us, what was your youth? What was your childhood like? What was your home life like? What was your relationship with your parents? Tell me about your first business. Tell me about your first failure. And at one point, the person just said, "That's it, enough. This is like a therapy session." And that's exactly what this is. We're digging deep into, and that I ask sort of 10 questions we should all ask ourselves before we get up and give these speeches, because we've got to know ourselves. We really do. And I think the reason this works on so many levels is because, imagine you're on a panel. I mean, there's so many reasons, but number one, no one can tell your stories better than you can, right? There's 8 billion people in the world. You have your own stories. You have your own life. You have your own anecdotes you can share. No one knows them better than you. And so when you tell them, like when you go up to a friend and you say, tell me the story of how you grew up, their face lights up, often, not always, but their face lights up, and they tell you all of a sudden that, they don't need any training. They don't need to rehearse it. These are the stories of your life. When you share those, no one else can do that better than you can. Number two, it's great because, so often we find ourselves on panel discussions, or, the third person to give a toast at a wedding or at a retirement, or the fifth person to speak to give a eulogy. And how many times you've been sitting there going, oh my God, everybody has said what I was going to say. They're literally taking the words out of your mouth, and you're panicking because you have nothing new to say. Oh, they told that story. They told that story. I have nothing left. When you tell the stories that only you can tell, then no one can steal your words ever. You never have to worry about being, outdone. So it works on so many levels. And also, especially when you don't have much time to prepare. If someone tells you, hey, you're coming to this event tonight, do you think you could just speak for 5 minutes? A lot of subjects, that's the worst thing you can do to somebody, ask them to speak without any preparation. But, suppose you have only an hour or two to get ready. Just think, what are 3 stories from my life that I could share that are relevant here? You don't have to have 10 points. You just, and they're probably stories that you've told at a party over and over again. And that's what people remember. We used to, State of the Union speech, I think 2014, State of the Union speech, 50 minutes. You all love State of the Union speeches, right? It's the speech that every speechwriter wants to write, dreams of writing, and then when they do it, it's a nightmare and you never want to do it again. But 2014, 40, 50-minute speech, lots of policies. In the end, President Obama ended by honoring an Army Ranger who'd been injured in Afghanistan named Corey Remsburg. Some of you might remember. And he stood up, and it was unbelievable. And he got a 2-minute standing ovation. And that's all that was on the news the next day. So months of preparation, work on the policies. Why? Because the stories resonate so powerfully. I mean, as some of you are nodding your head, you remember that speech. You remember that moment. What else did you remember from that speech? That's the power of stories. That's what people want. That's what your audience wants.
This episode is brought to you by the George Washington University's College of Professional Studies. With in-person and online programs ranging from master's degrees in public relations strategy to certificate programs in digital communications, GW offers more than just the credentials to help working professionals get ahead. It prepares them to be leaders in their field. Check out cps.gwu.edu for more information. I want to say something about your book related to this, of what I like so much about it, and folks who just picked it up today or who are listening for the first time, is that you gave this important advice about telling the stories that only you can tell. But then you had something very practical, which is 10 questions that you can use yourself or you could use with a client or a boss that you're working with. And I think that makes this a really great resource where you're going to read the book and you're going to say, wow, this is great. And you're going to say, this is one of those books I'm going to keep next to my desk, on my desk next to my computer, because I'm going to think of that and go, there's those 10 questions to prompt me. Right. And I just really liked that aspect of say it well. And I think the fact that you kind of structured it that way makes it very useful for readers.
I appreciate that because this is not a memoir. This is a handbook. This is a guidebook. This is a workbook. When I get books, I break out a pen and I underline things and I dog-ear things and it gets beat up. And, if 5 years from now I see someone carrying this book and it's in pristine condition, I'm going to be really sad. I'm going to see someone who it's all beat up and they tell me they turn to this every few weeks, every few months to refresh. That'll make me happy. And so what you're referring to is at the end of every chapter is kind of like a to-do list. I've sort of considered this as like atomic habits for public speaking. So you get the stories, but then in every chapter we summarize it. I summarize it. I call it the download because when we would go up to the Oval Office to get the president's advice for upcoming speech, we just had a nickname for it. They called it was to get the president's download. So I want every chapter you kind of get your own download.
Yeah, it's great. It makes it an excellent resource. Okay, you have a lot of rules in the book. You mentioned the barbecue rule. I'm from Kansas City. Love the barbecue rule. So thank you for that one. You have the 50-25-25 rule as well. And I wondered if you could talk about that.
So many rules.
But that's good. And I really like that one because I think it might help people think differently about preparing if they're for themselves or working with somebody for a speech. So can you talk about that one?
So basically, I think one of the biggest mistakes we all make, whether we're a speaker or a writer or creator or content creator of any kind, is we find out there's a speech, there's a event, there's a conference, there's a presentation, and everybody goes into panic mode because there's few things more terrifying than a blank page and the cursor blinking at you, just taunting you, right? Like there's no content here. We're like, create content, and I see this over and over again. Everyone just sort of dives in. They start creating 100 slides, or they start writing this really long speech. And then inevitably, there's a point where folks sit around, and you've probably all been in these situations, and you all look at each other and go, we've got 100 slides. What is this presentation about? What's our main message here? People have started creating all this content without thinking deeply about what we're doing here. And so the 50-25-25 rule is just my own personal framework for dealing with that, which is no matter how much time you have between now and your event, your presentation, maybe it's a month, maybe it's a 2 weeks or 1 week, a few hours, a few days. Just you don't have to start writing immediately. You don't have to start creating right away. Just set aside the first, I say, 50% of your time to do the most important job of all, which is to think about what you want to say. Write down your ideas, create a document, start collecting stories, start talking to people. Just do all that work, and you will find all of a sudden you have so much more material than you know what to do with. My sister's an artist. She collects all the paints on her palette because she thinks she'll need it. But then only when she sees it all does she realize which colors she'll actually use. Only then do I start writing, and do I encourage you to start writing. So I'm called a speechwriter, but I spend much more time researching and thinking and planning out than I ever do writing. And I think the words will come to you much quicker when you do that. And then another big mistake I think people make is they don't leave enough time to prepare, to edit, to practice out loud. How many I've worked with CEOs that the CEO is going to speak at 6 p.m. on Friday. Everyone sees the draft for the first time at 4 p.m. There's 2 hours left. There's no time to really critique the boss. If it's terrible, no one's going to say it. And there's no time to make it better. And there's no time to practice. So building in, 25% of your time, you can adapt this however it works for you. But building in these 3 distinct steps, I think, are the keys to being a successful communicator.
I really liked that. And for me, that upfront thinking, pulling examples, preparing.
Crazy idea, right?
It can, but it's funny. It feels like, because you haven't put a word on the page yet, that you're procrastinating. But actually, it's an important part of the process.
It's the most important thing. I think the most important predictor of whether or not you are an effective communicator is not what you do at the podium. It's not. It's all that work that you put into it, right? People think, oh, well, go on LinkedIn. Here's 8 tips for body language that will make you a millionaire, or 8 tips, and I look at this stuff and I go, the content kind of matters too here. And, I write this in the book, great body language will never save a bad speech. Put your, if you can get the body language right, great, do it. But don't obsess about that. Obsess about your ideas, obsess about your content. And say something interesting, say something concrete, say something that's going to challenge people, move people, inspire people. That's more, think again, all the speeches that you have enjoyed and been moved by in your life, that's what you remember, not so much the body language.
Yeah. DC is a very global city. GW is a very global university. You've written speeches for audiences all over the world. And I wonder if you could talk about how you approach influence around different cultures and nationalities. And there's a particular speech that I'm thinking of in Indonesia that really jumped out at me from chapter 2.
Sure.
So maybe I'll just kind of cue that up for you.
Yeah. I was as a foreign policy speaker, I was so lucky to be able to go on Air Force One with Barack Obama to more than 40 countries and watch, again, one of the great orators work his magic in all these different places, cross cultures, boundaries. And one of the reasons I believe so deeply in the book, yes, there are differences in how different cultures communicate. And some places in America, you're supposed to smile all the time. And Germany, maybe less so. Certain parts of Asia, smiling at the wrong time connotes a very different message. So I'm mindful of that. But I also do think that because I saw Barack Obama connect with audiences all over the world, that there are some just fundamental ways that we connect to one another as human beings, aside, that transcend politics and history. And I write about all the different ways that you can connect with an audience. And again, this is whether you're traveling overseas or whether you're going across town. And again, one of the ways is by sharing the stories that only you can share. I did a LinkedIn post today where it's one of my favorite videos from the Obama presidency. It's about 2 minutes of Barack Obama saying hello and greeting his audiences all over the world. It is the thing, it makes me so happy to watch this. Whenever I'm sad, I watch this video. And you're watching one of the great orators connect with people all over the world by literally speaking their language. And how simple and yet how profound that is, that one of the most powerful people in the world would take the time to learn somebody else's phrase, language, and try to connect with them on a human level. But you mentioned the Indonesia speech. So Barack Obama goes to Indonesia a few years into his presidency. He spent some time there as a child with his family. And so this was very much like a homecoming. And he spent if you have a moment, just Google Obama Jakarta speech. You don't have to watch the first 10 minutes. It's just unbelievable. I was there in the room when he gave it. All he did was he just shared memories of being a kid growing up in Jakarta. But he starts mentioning, again, show, don't tell, right? He could have just said, it's great to be back. I spent some time here. He starts listing off the street names, the foods he ate, the names of the stores. And every time someone in that audience heard something, they shop at that store. They've been on that street. They lived in that neighborhood. They just would roar. And what was he doing there? He was just establishing a human connection with somebody by saying, I share what you share. We have something in common. And the room, it was unbelievable. And we were there, and I was standing next to Ben Rhodes, who's the chief speechwriter. And I, through the roar of the crowd, I said, no president has ever given a speech. And he was also giving the speech in half of it was in Bahasa Indonesia. He was speaking, again, literally speaking the language of the people. And I said, no president has ever given a speech like this before. And Ben shouted back, no president will ever again, because, we're probably not going to, we may or may not have a president who's spent time in Indonesia. But if you watch that for 10 minutes, watch sort of a master of his craft connecting with an audience. And, but we can all do that. We can all find these things. Every time I speak to an audience, I try to open with what's the overlap? I always think of a speaker in an audience as kind of like two circles in a Venn diagram, right? There's you and your history and your interests and your values and your goals, and then there's theirs. And the more overlap there is, the more common ground, the more opportunities there are for connection. The less overlap, your work is harder. But and someone said, well, what if there's no overlap? And I think there's always overlap. We're all Americans, so there's a piece you can speak to. Maybe you're a parent. Maybe you're a brother or sister. Maybe you're a veteran. Maybe you're a person of faith. There's always at a minimum, we're fellow human beings, even though a lot of people don't want to acknowledge that these days. So there's always a way to connect with your audience on some way, but it's hard work. You have to dig deep sometimes, and I try to lay out ways that you can do that.
Well, that's what I really like, is that your advice takes some of the intimidation factor away. Because when you think writing a speech, or, oh my gosh,
Giving a speech,
or
yeah.
giving a speech, it just seems really daunting. But when you talk about using common language, finding the stories that only you can tell, using those personal experiences that will resonate with you, then you go, oh, okay, I could do that.
Yeah, I have this. Yeah, but I think I'm trying to democratize public speaking here a little bit. There's a lot of public speaking coaches out there, and the books are just loaded with ancient Greek and Latin. And I will tell you, as I say in the book, before I became a speechwriter, I never took a public speaking course, never took a course on speech writing or rhetoric. I never read a book about it. I probably should have, because I really struggled at the beginning and I almost quit a few times. I probably should have read a book like this. But, I didn't learn about ethos and pathos and logos until after I left the White House. I mean, we were never sitting there with Barack Obama and he's going through a speech going, this is all right, but it really needs more logos or more pathos. That's just not how we, thought about it. Everything in the book, I say I've learned by just doing it. And so I deliberately don't use any of those words. I don't want a young person to read this book and go, wait, what was pathos again? What was logo? I mean, I think there's easier. We all know this stuff. And actually, I should point out, so much of it is my experience learning from President Obama. And I'm very grateful to him and his office that they're allowing me to share my conversations with him over the years. And so I hope that every chapter you feel like you're having a conversation with Barack Obama about writing and communication, because we learned from him for 8 years. And this book, I hope, is a channel for you to learn from him as well. But I realize that it's kind of a leap to say, well, Barack Obama did this, you can do it too. He had 6 speechwriters work themselves around the clock, to do it. And you don't have that. We don't have that. So in every chapter, I also have stories of just ordinary folks from all across the country who've oftentimes gone viral. You probably know a lot of these people because you've heard their speeches. And I put them in there because I want everyone to know that, okay, here's what Barack Obama was doing. Here's maybe even some research, some neuroscience, some psychology to show you why it was so powerful. We didn't realize it at the time, but that's what was going on. And by the way, here's a story of just a young person or someone out there in the world who did it without even realizing what they were doing. But I think so many of these lessons we actually know, and so many of those stories in there are of young people who, again, they haven't spent decades in institutions in corporate America, and they don't know what jargon is. They just speak from their heart. They speak what's true. And so I think, we can learn from young people, and that's why so many of the stories in there are from young people.
Speaking of young people, some of the questions that I've gotten when I've told people that I was going to speak with you about this book from younger people are, how has the world of speech writing, the role of a communications advisor changed because of social media and now because of AI being able to generate content? When you joined the Obama team already, that was an election that was driven by social media in a really unique way.
First Facebook social media president,
absolutely, right? And so social media was already part of it. You gave an example from the State of the Union where a specific item ended up on TV. Now those moments are still TV, but also on social. So anyway, what do you see this world changing? How do you see this world changing because of social media and because of AI?
We were definitely feeling it. I remember some conversations we had towards the end of the administration where here we are, laboring over weeks to write these 40, 50-minute speeches. The president goes out and gives them, and the people in the room hear it. Maybe a few thousand people hear it online, but then 99.9% of Americans, they get a snippet. And that was always true. We've always had sound bites, but now it's even more so. So I remember asking the question at one point, should we be writing 50-minute speeches anymore? It's a lot of work. It's a lot of work for us, a lot of work for the president. What's the return, the ROI here on this investment of time and energy and resources? And I think generally, yeah, at this point, shorter has always been better, but I think especially now, you should be able to make your point in quickly. I don't want to put a hard number on it because people say, you should never speak more than 21 minutes. Well, come on. We've all been inspired by speeches that go on for longer than that. We go to church, we go to synagogue, we go to temple, and we can all be mesmerized by a great preacher or imam. It's not the length, it's not the quantity, it's the quality. You can have a really, great hour-long speech. You can have a terrible 4-minute speech. So I don't all these people who write books with rules. I mean, they're just ridiculous. But these hard and fast rules. So Tim Walz got up and introduced himself to America and gave a great speech, and that was 16 minutes. By the way, that was exactly the length of Barack Obama's speech at the 2004. And there's nothing magical about 16 minutes, but you can say, I always like to say, you can, you don't have to speak a lot to say a lot. You can say a lot in a little bit of time if you do it right. But I think that's more important than ever. And then you asked about AI. I mean, my 2 basic rules on AI. So I started writing this, and then in the middle of this work, I had everything planned out, and then ChatGPT happens. And people are like, well, does anyone want a book like this anymore? So throughout the book, I do these little asides, when to ask a bot and when not to ask a bot. So I'd like to think it's the first public speaking book of the AI age. And who knows, maybe in 5 years I'll have a completely different take on it. But these are my thoughts on AI as of about a year ago. And but the way I come out on it is, if you are going to stand up or sit in front of, as a human being, in front of other human beings, and you expect to form a human emotional connection with them, don't ever use a bot for that. That your audience wants humanity. They want what's in your heart. They do not want stuff regurgitated by a machine. We've already seen some examples in politics of people doing it, sometimes on purpose to test the audience, sometimes to see if they can get away with it. We've seen some universities use it and they get in trouble. People want a human connection now more than ever. I think people want this, especially we don't know what to believe. We don't know what's true. We don't know what's being generated by a human versus machine. So this is you get up in front of a group of people, be a human, talk like a human, share what's in your heart, and the machine will never know what's in your heart. So don't do that. Now, as a partner, as a co-pilot, as a researcher, I use it all the time. Give me 10 quotes by Martin Luther King. You got to check them because they're just making stuff up right now at this point. Help me, take this 1,000-word draft and shrink it by 500 words. I mean, I would never just use it. It's not clean, but it's a helpful thought partner. So I say use it as a partner. I teach speech writing at, another school up the road. And I tell them, if I ever find that you're using an AI in the speech writing course to write, I mean, that's an automatic F. That's not what the audience wants. And think about it. Yeah, there's these folks online, they sometimes say, I wrote the following speech with a chatbot. It only took me 3 days and 100 prompts, but I got it. I'm thinking, you're basically writing the speech yourself. Why not just do it?
Yeah.
But as a thought partner, give me 10 topics. It's an amazing tool. Pardon me.
I love that Say It Well is the first book on public speaking for the age of AI with those snippets in there. And I loved how you included those throughout the book. That lesson you just gave is one of many reasons that so many of us are going to want to have Say It Well on our desk, right next to us to reach to as a resource. I know we could answer so many more questions, except the problem is you have dozens and dozens of books you have to sign before the end of the time. So we're going to have to finish this component of the evening. But I just want to say thank you so much, not only for writing this book, but for sharing this with us today, because there's so much wisdom in here. It's a tremendous guide for all of us, whatever you do in the field of communications. And I want to thank again the George Washington University College of Professional Studies for bringing you here today and hosting this. And please, everyone, help me thank Terry Szuplat for being with us today.
Well, thank you.
Chief Influencer is a production of Social Driver. We help clients transform complexity into clarity with people-centered strategies. Whether you're looking to elevate the influence of your brand or of your leaders, check out socialdriver.com to learn more. For show notes or to nominate a guest, visit us at chiefinfluencer.org or follow Chief Influencer on LinkedIn.